Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 80. Guten Chassidus Elul. Today is the second day of the Chassidus Elul. As we know, there are two opinions of when Moshe Rabbeinu marched back up on the mountain after the first 40 days when he received the Torah, and then came the second 40 days, which is called Yemei Kas, where he did not receive days of wrath, which includes the 3 weeks and the 9 days. And then the third time he goes up is the Chassidus Ol, and there's two opinions: the first day of the Chassidus, which would be the 30th day of or the second day of the Chassidus, which is the first day of El. Either way, it's a special day, the Chassidus, as the Rebbe speaks about the word Reish Chassidus. Reish is not Chilas HaChassidus, like Rosh Hashanah, not Chilas Hashanah, not the beginning of the month or the beginning of the year, but rather the head of the year. Now, a head is more than a beginning. A head is a central nervous system. It encompasses the entire organism, and as such, a beginning would be the first day of a period of time, let's say of a year, of a month, of a week. When you say Reish, it means it controls the entire activities of that month. So as such, Rosh Chassidus El therefore encompasses the entire experience of Elul, which means that everything that we'll be doing in this month, the Avodah, the work, which is the work as we discussed last week, and I won't go over all of that, I'll just talk about a few extra points. The Avodah of the Cheshbon, accounting, giving an account and an assessment of everything that took place in the past year, and it's also Chedesh HaChanah, preparing us for the new year. So it all is encompassed on this day of Rosh Chassidus El when the journey begins. The book I did, 60 Days, I mentioned last week, and many of you are familiar with, was precisely meant to help people, guide them through this journey. Because if we really wanted to make it meaningful, applied Chassidus, you have to take it to heart. It can't just be done something mechanically. It has to be something that we personally apply, the ideas of El. And of course, the biggest principle of El is all the 5 Rosh Tevos, but especially the Ani L'Dei V'Dei Li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. And as the Rebbe makes it very clear, especially in the later years, Memtes and Nun, when he spoke about it, the idea of love, the idea that somebody cares about you, and that you care about somebody is maybe the greatest transcendent experience that a human being can have. Besides the nurturing element of it, besides the making you feel validated and reinforced, which is so critical in a hostile world in which we live, if every person had that in a healthy way, most of our problems would go away, if not all of our problems. So our challenge is exactly what Elul comes to address in a very practical, personal, and emotional sense, the idea of I am to my beloved and my beloved is to I, which really means the idea of love, and to initiate an equal, reciprocal relationship, both ben adam l'chavere, and of course, ben adam l'chavere is an example for ben adam l'mokim, as the Rebbe brings from Rashi in Shabbos, when he says Zuhi kol ha'Torah kula, Hillel says to the potential convert, V'havta re'echa kamecha, he says re'echa zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we see how there's an equating between our relationship with God as a friend and V'havta re'echa kamecha, which of course literally means re'echa means your fellow, ben adam l'chavere, but they are reflected in one another. The Sefer Shir HaShirim, which is all a love story, a romantic love story. But as the Rambam explains, it's a mashal for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Knesset Yisrael, a relationship between God and the people. So then the question is, why isn't it spoken in that language? Why man and woman? Because a man and woman evolves from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Knesset Yisrael, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu and V'shchinte, the Shechina and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the masculine element of the divine, in the language of Chassidus Zoh, and the feminine dimension, which is Malchus. And that, of course, the Rambam doesn't speak in the language of Chassidus or Kabbalah. It says HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Knesset Yisrael. So it's not just a metaphor, it is actually man and woman are creating the divine image, Zocher Nekeva Bara Esam. Both together, one make up comprise the complete divine image. And when they join together in Ani L'Dei V'Dei Li relationship, you have the divine image recreated on earth. So it's not just a metaphor in the sense of a nice mashal, it's actually one evolves from the other. This explains that a mashal and an imshal are not just examples in Torah, but a mashal is actually the garment, the so-called thing, the handle with which we can relate to more sublime and ethereal concepts. So essentially, a healthy marriage and relationship, a healthy anila deidi v'deidi li among humans, is really a healthy relationship between ourselves and God, because it's hainu hach, it's one thing. So anila deidi v'deidi li, which is of course a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, in contrast to the other pasuk that Chassidus brings, v'deidi li v'ani loi, where the order is my beloved to me and I am to him, which refers to, as Chassidus explains, to the month of Nisan, Momai Lamata, where there the Eibishter took us out al kamfei neshadim. That was an experience from above down. Elul is before Tishrei. Tishrei is the Avedas HaTshuva, the Aveda from the bottom up, that we initiate and create this reciprocal relationship. But it's the essence of all of existence, the symbiosis and the exchange of give and take of two entities. And in the microcosm, it's captured in the man and woman in marriage. For Hayil Lebasar Echad, one flesh. Psychologically, it's every form of love that we extend to others, where real healthy love is always a give and take. There's no one just giver, one taker. Even when we speak about mashpia and makabel, doesn't just mean that makabel in the sense is completely receiving. It gives through receiving. The receptive energy is itself a form of giving, but it's two different forms of giving, like the sun and the moon. So there's tremendous lessons that can be derived from Elul in our personal lives, especially this Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li, and now we're in the Rosh Chodesh, which begins the month. So how we set the stage, how we set our mindset and our heart set today, it really sets the tone for the entire month. Melech Basada, which if you think about it is also a loving experience, because like he says, he shows them panim seichel case, and anything that they want, he shows them a smiling face, the king does, as he's in the field. It's not the formal king that you need to go through all the chambers and all the filters and buffers that in the formal sense of the word. Melech Basada, the king comes out and is in the state together with the people, Basada in the field, shows them a smiling face, and they can ask anything they want to ask. What more loving is there than that? Many people ask the question, where do you see love in Yiddishkeit and Torah and Chassidus? Well, love is everywhere. And Anila V'Deidi V'Deidi Li captures it in a very specific way. And as I said, there are many, many lessons, but that's an overall overview of what it says in Chassidus about this day of Chodesh El. Being that we're also coming to Parshas Shoftim, so the Rebbe explains that in Likutei Torah, there's Maimorim on every of the Parshas. Torah and Likutei Torah, as you know, is an extension one of the other. Torah goes from Bereshis till Vayakel, and Likutei Torah starts from Beshalach, one Maimon on Beshalach, and then jumps to Pekudei, and then really goes from Vayikra on. And the Rebbe has a sikh when he kochzach, and when the Likutei Torah came out, Tovshim Mem Daled, Pasha Kisis, I believe, the Rebbe spoke about it at length, why this one ends, and they overlap in a sense. Again, here's not the place to go into it, but bottom line is that the Torah, Likutei Torah goes in all the Parshas, and there's one Parsha that's missing. There's no Parsha Shoftim in Likutei Torah. The Rebbe actually spoke about it in the Maimon and Tovshim Mem Vav, and explained Yashlemer why. You can look it up there. But the bottom line is, there's no Shoftim. It goes to the A, and the Maimorim of Elul are included in the Parsha the A. The Melech Basada, the famous Anila Deidi Maimon in Likutei Torah, is under the Keteres, which is the header of the A, and it skips Shoftim. Shoftim v'Shetrim refers in Avedas Hashem, refers to the judges and law enforcers that will be placed in B'chol Sharecha. And the Rebbe explains this is the Aveda of Elul. Because what's B'chol Sharecha? The Shach on the Torah, Sif Sekein on the Torah explains that Sharecha, there are 7 Sha'arim, there are 7 gates. Essentially, the human being is like a walled city. Think of ourselves, our self-contained entity. And there's 7 gates, like in any walled city, that connects us to interact with the world around us. What are the 7 gates? The 2 eyes, the 2 ears, the 2 nostrils, and the mouth. 2, 4, 6, 7. And it says, the Pasuk says, Shoftim v'Shetrim titin lecha b'chol sharecha. You shall place judges and law enforcers at your gates. What enters your eyes, what enters your ears, what enters your nose, what enters your mouth, has to always be done with great caution. A shefet refers, of course, to someone who is an authority that can tell you. In the case of Aveda, that's the meichin. Shefet is the meichin, the mind, the cognitive skills that we have, the cognitive faculties that allow us to look at something objectively and ask the question, does this belong in a Jewish person's life? Should I be looking at this? Should my 2 eyes, my 2 ears, my 2 nostrils, and my mouth, the 7 gates, these are the gatekeepers that should be watching. And Shaitanim are the law enforcers, because the Shafet can render his opinion, but now it has to be enforced. So Shaitanim is far more the emotional, the Shmoyach Shalat Ala Lev, that the Moyach, the Shafet, rules the ruling, and the law enforcer, the policeman, goes and makes sure that it's implemented. And that's the Isgabrus, the strength that a person applies upon themselves, their own law enforcer, to make sure that what the Shafet says is actually implemented in our lives. Now, of course, the famous Shoftim Sikha we cannot ignore, of Tavshin Nun Aleph, which I recall very vividly. I had the schus to write it up, and people often ask me, did you add anything, and so on. Just for the record, we didn't add anything in Sikhas. There was the Rebbe's Sikhas, except the Rebbe would speak sometimes Bekitza and gave us different guidelines of how to write it. When you write something, it has to be sometimes fleshed out. And we fleshed it out either based on other places or based on what was alluded to, or sometimes asking the Rebbe directly. The Shoftim Sikh, I can tell you, is almost exactly as the way the Rebbe said it. And it was a very big chiddush, as the Rebbe spoke about the Shoftim Shaitim, but he spoke about Shoftim Shaitim also as well in this context, that Shoftim and Shaitir is similar to what we say in the Haftarah of this week as well. And the Rebbe explains the difference between Shoftim and Shaitir is the same as a Yayitz. Sheftayach and Yayitz. So a Shoftim, of course, is the same word Shoftim, and a Shaitir is Yayitz. What is the difference between the two? That a Shoftim is like a Selu Charav, it's an authority. And a Yayitz is a Knei Lecha Chaver, acquire a friend. Someone more on your level, not necessarily authority, but they're more, they can explain it and you can relate to them more. A Rav is a Rav. A Shoftim renders an opinion. A Yayitz has the quality that it's more zugänglich, it's more relatable, and therefore not as compelling, but it's more bepnimius. Chassidus explains at length the difference between Pnimius and Makif. So there's many different Mamorim and Ayim Beis in the Parakim in the 50s, chapter in the 50s approximately. We talk the difference between Rotzen and the Keches Pnimim. That Rotzen is a Shelet. It's like a Rav. It imposes itself. It commands one to do something. Whereas Shaiter, or in this case Yoyitz, actually is more Keches Pnimim. It explains it. You educate the person instead of it being commanded to do so. And each has a mila over the other, and both together, really the ultimate goal is to have the makif and pnimi come together. Okay. And again, many lessons can be derived from this in context of Avedis Hashem, applied Chassidus. I hope this suffices. And Tam L'chachem v'yechkem eid, which means may someone's given some wisdom, and may they take it further and flesh it out further and embellish on it and apply it each in their own personal life. With that said, let us go to some follow-up and some new topic. First of all, I just want to get out of the way because the people asked me the question. That didn't sound very good. Get it out of the way. Let me rephrase that. Get out of the way sounds dismissive, but meaning let's finish up and tie the knots by the question about laziness and homeschooling. And then I'm going to go into a few serious topics, which high time that we address. So first, let's deal with the follow-up. Okay, so one writer writes, talking about laziness, atzlus in the language of Torah, that in Tanya, I'm just going to sum it up because it's a rather long letter, but I just want to sum up. Atzlus is equated with atzvus. Alter Rebbe says atzvus and atzlus come from Yesod Ofar. Atzvus is depression, and atzlus is laziness. They both come from Yesod Ofar. Sloth and melancholy, as this person writes it, emanate from the element of earth. And he explains that with this, the Alter Rebbe is mechadish and challenges modern liberal Western thought by saying that laziness does exist. It's actually a force in our lives. It's not just a person not motivated. The absence of motivation is laziness. It's true that motivation will counter laziness, but laziness is a force of its own, just like melancholy is a force of its own. And he goes on to explain how the Alter Rebbe's Chiddush is very critical in understanding how we deal with laziness. So it's something to be actually battled. By equating the two, the Alter Rebbe makes plain how both in essence are the same thing, viruses that cause paralysis, melancholy and laziness. Not an attack on a specific area, but against one's general ability to move. It's a spiritual mobility and flexibility disorder. The purpose of the Nefesh Abamis is to knock you out. His greatest victory is in making you incapacitated. Hence, every single one of us have a natural, hardwired into our DNA aversion to work and effort. So it's a very good point. In other words, taking it much further than just something, okay, let's deal with things, but seeing it as one of the Nefesh Abamis' tools. And it's fascinating indeed that the Alter Rebbe does equate that with Atzvus. We will post, hopefully, this comment, so you can read it more in detail, but I think I get the gist of it. And that laziness, I just want to continue one more thing, is an expression of yeshus. Is a celebration of nothingness, laziness. It is being a professional nothing. I am an expert at being just a waste of space. Pretty heavy words, but since this writer writes it, this is the definition of existence in the Klippa dictionary, an inanimate object occupying space. By that fact alone, I play an important role. What role? I'm part of the God cover-up. I conceal godliness by my mere existence, and that's exactly as I should be. A perfect something that stands for nothing. There were the writers that would put it this way, that there are people who know more and more about less and less. Or they say they know the value, they know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. No call for change or to improve. Hence, laziness represents the massive ultimate ego, 100% pure, unadulterated ego, drunk on hubris. Man's ego is supremely proud of itself. Why? Because I exist. Okay. So thank you very much for that. On a homeschooling, there was a follow-up. So let me read the follow-up. Dear Rabbi Jacobson Shaykhia, I'd like to first thank you for all the shiurim. I especially appreciate the material you bring directly from the Rebbe and the research you devote to this great project. I wanted to point out that I was homeschooled and very much liked it. In my city, the Chabad school was very small, with grades mixed, etc., and both the Kaddish and Chil were not very good. My parents offered to support the school financially so it would be better, but the administration didn't want any meddling into their affairs. Eventually, my mother asked the Rebbe if homeschooling would be a good idea, and he gave her an enthusiastic bracha to be matzliach. I had many friends from different backgrounds and kept in touch with friends who went away to school. I especially appreciate the extra years and time I spent with my parents, especially my mother and the teachers she handpicked for me, including my city's renowned Rosh Yeshiva. I can say with pride that I am more knowledgeable than the vast majority of my Chabad young women colleagues in both Kodesh and Chil, and have a deep passion for learning Torah that I continue learning every day. I don't know how much of it is nature versus nurture, because I am an ambitious, intellectual, independent person by nature who loves to learn especially challenging subjects and Torah above all. I crave Kedusha and don't have much taivus in comparison to my whole mostly modern generation, so maybe my upbringing wouldn't be appropriate for some other children. But I certainly wish to emphasize that homeschooling is a viable option, and that on the contrary to ending up less knowledgeable, social, etc., a homeschool child can end up very normal, well-adjusted and Chassidish, with maybe less of a risk than being in school with a majority of modern children. I don't have a letter because the answer was in Yechidus when I was little, meaning no letter from the Rebbe. It's an answer in Yechidus. Sei gesund und stark and much hatzlach in all your wonderful endeavors. Okay, so we covered that follow-up. Let me jump into the next subject, viewer discretion advised. The tragic suicide of Mefegi Meir, among other recent tragedies, more than the public is aware of, has brought to the fore many critical questions. What anguish would cause someone to take their own life? How should we be dealing with our troubled youth? Is there anyone to blame? How responsible are parents, family, and our school systems? What role does mental illness and the way we do or don't deal with it play in all of this? Are we properly handling mental illness, especially considering the deep stigma and shame associated with it? Families and communities are being vilified for not creating a nurturing environment for our young people facing challenges. But is this accurate or just a scapegoating campaign? With much talk about what's lacking in the community and causing youth to leave Yiddishkeit, what about the other end of the spectrum? Are there organizations and support groups for these people, creating a healthy environment for them, helping them build functional lives? or are they simply perpetuating the negative sentiments they harbor? Okay. So this is a big topic which I do not believe I'll be able to address in one episode, but it's a good place to begin. I especially chose this Rosh Chodesh Elul because if we're going to make an accounting and we're going to be honest, and an honest appraisal, this is something we have to address. And as sad as it is and hard to speak about, time has come. Now, I've addressed the topic in previous episodes about the issue of mental illness, but more in context of shidduchim and so on. Let me address it in this context. And I've been also asked by a number of people, as I read about this a few weeks ago, when I asked the public to respond to any answers you have from the Rebbe, any questions you may have on this topic, that, and this is not to toot anyone's horn, but a number of years ago, due to what I recognize as seeing a major, what can I say, plague in the area of child molestation, addressing that, even though at the time didn't sound very politically correct to do, the same thing is with this topic. This is not a topic anyone wants to speak about. So let me start with the addressing the issue of the stigma itself. I was just reading an article this week about Robin Williams. So though he wasn't Jewish, but essentially also mental illness, depression, that ultimately caused him to take his life. We don't know the statistics of suicide out there, and hopefully it's a low statistic. But the fact of the matter, even if one is more than enough to discuss, and especially when we speak about Chassidus and Chassidus Applied, what does Chassidus have to say about all this? What do the Rabbeim have to say about this? Now it's interesting that Rabbeim, especially the Rebbe, did not want to give credence, so did not talk about it in a very direct way, like saying, oh, here's an issue, but there is indirect, and there's letters, and there's answers in private, mostly in private. Because, as I said, there's a reason why, not because of avoiding it, because these issues are very personal, and it's critical to be addressed in a very discreet and in a impersonal, in a private, confidential way. So then, of course, the question is, why am I speaking about it? Well, number one is I'm not a Rebbe. Number two, because this happens to be a forum that people are listening to, and it's an opportunity. The goal here is to speak as if it's private. I'm not going to obviously in any way breach any confidence, but it's a topic that needs to be addressed, and precisely because it is shrouded in so much darkness and shame and stigma, by talking about it, that's the first place how you begin to address this issue. And here it's very important to have a divide and conquer approach. The real problem when it comes to, especially to mental illness, and let's start with that, and then I'll go to some of the other topics related. The real problem is not just the issue itself. The issue itself, why God, in his mysterious ways, would allow some people to be born a certain way or to contract at some point in their lives any type of mental disorder, emotional disorder, is the mysteries of God. But what is in our control is what we do about it. And I can speak from my experience, and you can check this with professionals and practitioners and therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists. The collateral damage that the humans do as a result of the either concealment, the avoidance, the denial, the blaming others, the shame, is often much worse than the original problem. It's like any infection. When you have an infection, so the infection, if you nip it in the bud, you isolate it, you stop the bleeding, and you figure out a way to deal with it. But what happens if you don't? It begins to fester. You make believe there's no infection, or the problem lies elsewhere. What happens is it begins to fester, it begins to grow, to a point then that you can't control it any longer. So a critical component is our attitude. Our attitude. And you'll see consistently in the Rebbe's letters, to anyone that's dealing with any challenge, but particularly emotional and psychological challenges, it comes down to always focusing on the positive, not dwelling on it, letting the professionals do what they have to do, that's necessary, but focusing on the positive, that any challenge can be overcome. Because what happens is we begin to personalize it. There are parents who, for example, when they hear something of this nature in their own children, the first reaction is a knee-jerk reaction is impossible, denial. Or they start having so much shame that they ignore it. Or they begin to create a distorted reality that everybody in the family unit has to walk on eggshells around that particular individual. All of these are unhealthy reactions. Often it feeds into people's own personal reputation, their shame, as I mentioned, their what people are going to say, shidduchim effects, and so on and so forth. So it's critical that it has to be addressed in a healthy way. So there are unhealthy things in this world, but that doesn't mean we have to address an unhealthy thing with an unhealthy manner. That makes the problem much bigger, because then the healthy people who are supposed to be healthy can't really be of help. They're becoming part of the problem. What this means, my friends, is the following. Whether you're a parent or an educator or just a person, if you see anyone exhibiting any type of things that seem a little off, our role is to be responsible. In a very respectful way, depending what your situation is, we have to be able to be there for people who are in this situation. We cannot say it's not happening or blame someone else or ignoring, etc., etc. We have to be vigilant and recognize these things early on. You see your child a little more depressed than usual. You see that they're withholding or just isolating themselves. Parents know something's off. Address it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a mental illness. It doesn't mean it's emotional. It could be something happened. But it's always better to err on the side of caution than the other way around. This doesn't mean to become hysterical. It doesn't mean to call in the troops and start. It means in a very subtle way, look at it. Because our actions and reactions to these things are a major impact in what happens. I'm not going to now say that anyone, God forbid, who's taken their own life, the parents did not pay attention, that's why they're at fault. We'll soon address blame. Number one is we don't blame people. We're talking here what you can do, preventive medicine. If someone does not do preventive medicine, we don't say, because you didn't do that, that's why this happened. No, there's a lot of combination of factors. What I'm trying to suggest is, not just suggest, that the Chassidus Torah approach is not tzaddik b'mnasa yichya, it's not even running to the tzaddik, it's not running, it's doing what you can do. That we have to feel empowered and know that no matter what the situation is, we can do something about it. You bring in a professional, get advice, all discreetly, not turning this into a whole monster that's not necessary, because that itself can be a problem, but definitely not ignoring. This is the first thing that all of us can do. This is called a preventive approach. We'll soon address, whether it's in this episode or in future episodes, what to do after the fact. The preventive approach is children are born healthy. If, God forbid, a child is born with any type of so-called different special quality, as the Rebbe puts it, special children, or some type of mental or emotional handicap, I don't even know if that's the right word I'd like to use, but let's put it this way, something that is not of the usual spectrum, we have to remember that we have all the power to do something to help that child, to help grow into an adult and productive adult. I'm getting into, and that, what is in our control, is absolutely we are accountable for. And this is a critical component that I'm repeating several times, because it can be said, I see so many problems that I personally witness that had the reaction been different, everything would have been different. This doesn't mean you can heal the problem, but you can, as I said, control it. You can confine it. How many people don't go onto medications because of the stigma, because of the shame, because the parents didn't want to accept it? And not going to medication caused far greater problems. You have to look at this very honestly and straight. Clarity is the biggest blessing. Last week we read it. So the Rebbe asks, what's the Reya Nechi Nesen? Nesen is Kol HaNesen, but Ayin Yafi Nesen. It's a matana. What's the gift of giving a blessing? What's the gift of a curse? And the answer is brilliant. And a psychological answer, the answer is because to know what path not to go on is just as important to know what path to walk on. The curse is not the blessing, is not the gift. The gift is to know what is something inappropriate. So awareness and clarity is the greatest blessing of all. Let's start with that. That's number one that every person can do. As far as blame game is not a healthy approach in general. Anyone blaming people, even themselves, is usually a sign that you're not really addressing the issue. It's much easier to blame instead of doing something about it. You look at the Rabbeim, you look at any given situation. Look at the Alter Rebbe. He's imprisoned. Why? Because they're mastered on him. There was a Mesira. And yet, he looked at it not as something someone did, just like Yosef told his brothers, it's not that you that put me here, it's the Eibusher that sent me here. This is the attitude of a Torah person, a Chassidus She'id, looks at the situation, doesn't go and say, okay, now I blame someone, now I'm going to go get even with them. Even if I don't get even with them, but that's who I blame. There's no such thing as blame. Blame is not a Torah approach to blame people. This doesn't mean that people don't have to be accountable. This doesn't mean that you can't call people to be accountable for a crime they may have done. But to go to blame is not necessarily a productive approach in helping a situation here. So to start blaming parents, to start blaming school system, this may be inappropriate altogether, and especially if it's coming from someone who's in a Gebedam, who has an axe to grind, who may have a lot of grievances against their own parents or the system that hurt them. So I don't know if that person can be trusted. This doesn't mean the system or the parents or the schools are all great. It's two separate things. They have to be looked at. Often when people would be, I've heard a number of times, people would speak to the Rebbe, Lashon Hara, so to speak, about the Bochrim. Like so one woman was told the Rebbe, the Bochrim are all smoking. I see a Bochrim sleep late. And the Rebbe says, you're speaking about my children. And then, after the Yechidus, the Rebbe gave it over the head to the Rabbi Mentlik, whoever, to tell the Bochrim who are behaving that way. Now, what is that? The Rebbe is being, God forbid, inconsistent? No. Because there's one thing, you stop coming here to criticize and blame. They're my children. They're very special. And the approach here is not just to sit and blame. But internally, in a productive way, in a subtle way, in a confidential way, the Rebbe did what he had to do. Because you have to avoid the trap of starting to criticize, which was another topic that we have to address, criticizing everybody. Let's be honest. Sit down and think about why we criticize and why we blame. It's usually due to our own inadequacy. Instead of taking responsibility for a situation, we blame other people. It's very easy to do. You blame the school for anything with your children. The school blames the parents. They all both blame the street. Everyone can be blamed. Everyone can carry the responsibility. The healthy approach has to be is, are we responsible? And if we thought it that way, then we're partners in this. You know, the din of Egla Arufa, though it's not practiced today for many reasons, but the din of Egla Arufa, what's Egla Arufa? That God forbid, somebody's found killed, and they're found in the road. The responsible party is the city that is closest to the place where this person was found. Now, why is the city responsible? Because the city is responsible for its citizens and also for those that visit. So even though you could say, wait a second, the city didn't do anything, but they did not create a climate that protected this person. They have to bring an Egla Rufa Kapara. So kinds of dinim on it. The lesson is very clear. A community is responsible. Uba'arta haram ekir b'cha is expression of the Torah. Here you see the brilliance of the Alter Rebbe, how he teaches a word. Ba'arta haram ekir b'cha means why we have to punish someone that did something wrong, because you have to erase. Ba'arta, you have to cleanse, you have to burn out, you have to annihilate the Ra from within you. Ra mekir b'cha, but the word mekir b'cha doesn't mean mekir l'secha, mekir b'cha from within you. If there's something in your community, in your proximity, in your environment that's inappropriate, then it's mekir b'cha, means it's somewhere inside of you. And as such, we carry responsibility. So our approach to all of this has to be is, my friends, we have a crisis. We have young people, troubled young people, whether it's something that is medical, maybe not medical, maybe due to a bad upbringing, environment, school. We are all responsible. It's not a blame game. We're all equally responsible. And if we want to do something productive, we have to put our heads together and figure out how to create a safer environment, that a person has someone they can come to speak to if they have a trouble. Very often you'll hear from many, they had no one, from many of these people who became troubled and then who knows what happens next. I had no one to speak to. I spoke to someone, I was laughed at, I was dismissed, don't think about it. We need to be there, but whether it's parents, educators, community, friends, we need to be there. Whatever you see, someone in need like that, even if it's subtle, you never know, you may be the person. It could be a neighbor. Now this doesn't mean mixing our nose into other people's business, it means being sensitive, like the din with Egla Rufa. Yes, they should have been there in some way, should have protected, they should have been sensitive, this guy's traveling alone, whatever it may be. Now the interesting thing is, even if the person was a murderer, and actually that the din is derived sometimes from that, if the person was a murderer and was killed, that too is a responsibility of the community because of that particular reason. Now, that's regarding blame and responsibility. Now, you have these different organizations who are trying to help people who have somewhat become estranged from their families or from their communities. I'm not here to pass judgment on these organizations. I haven't studied them well enough. But obviously everyone can fall into the trap of just blaming the religious environment that they grew up in, of being judgmental, of being intolerant and condescending and all that. But again, if we're all in this together, is that a healthy approach? Are you perhaps doing something that is becoming part of a scapegoating, like just justifying your own behavior? So I think we have to look at all these elements together and see them as ultimately a responsibility that each one of us has to take. Now, there are several ways that have to be dealt with mental illness. Mental illness is, number one, is healthy parents, and if they're not healthy, they'll let them bring in someone else who care about their children, have to take them to a professional and get a diagnosis. If you need more than one professional, you go to two. Simultaneously, you also go and speak to a mashpia, someone who may not have a medical knowledge, but they have the sensitivity of what a soul needs. Those two things together can go a long way in the direction of what to do. And this includes how to behave, as I said, the collateral damage to prevent. Should the family be told? Should others be told? There's many, many choices and decisions that have to be made when someone is suffering from a particular situation. It's case by case, and that's why I cannot talk about Fegi Meir or anybody else because I don't know all the details of what took place. But it is definitely the responsibility of the parents, the community, the schools, and everything. When you see something that is not exactly the way it's going the right way, you have to do something about it. Now, many say, 1 second, my child no longer wants to speak to me. So you find behind the scenes, you find something. There's always an approach. I'm not going to say there's a solution that solves it all, but there's always an approach, and that's the attitude we have to take to this. So this is an opening of this discussion. I have much more to say about especially the mental illness component, but I wanted to address this because I think it's very, very critical. I want to say one more thing. Just punkt hashgacha pratis. I was reading the New York Times of today. Actually, when is this? Sunday Review. Yeah, I think it was written August 14th. Oliver Sacks. Oliver Sacks writes a whole article, a very moving, heart-wrenching article actually, about his experiences. He grew up in England, and his mother and her 17 brothers and sisters had an Orthodox upbringing. That's how he begins. All about Shabbos and so on. Then he talks about how he slowly started wandering away from it, from what he grew up in. But here's the main devastating piece, where he talks about his mother, who's a doctor, by the way. But then for Shabbos, she would, of course, put everything aside and prepare for Shabbos. Then he says, I gradually became more indifferent into the beliefs and habits of my parents, though there was no particular point of rupture until I was 18. It was then that my father, inquiring into my sexual feelings, compelled me to admit that I liked boys. I haven't done anything, I said. It's just a feeling, but don't tell Ma. She won't be able to take it. Listen to this. He did tell her, and the next morning she came down with a look of horror on her face and shrieked at me. You are an abomination. I wish you had never been born. She was no doubt thinking of the verse in Leviticus that read, if a man also lie with mankind, he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. The matter was never mentioned again, but her harsh words made me hate religion's capacity for bigotry and cruelty. Then he goes on to speak how he became a doctor. But one line that jumped out at me, which really struck home. He said, I found a sort of community when he became a doctor and so on, but I craved some deeper connection, meaning in my life. And it was the absence of this, I think, that drew me into near-suicidal addiction to amphetamines in the 1960s. And then he continues. It's very interesting, the rest of it. I'll leave it to you to go look it up yourselves. If you don't want to look at the New York Times, Gesundheit, Tove Aleichem Bracha, as the Rebbe said. But it's a very interesting article. What struck me was how a mother's words, forget about what he was going through, can change a person's life forever. He talks about it later, how it haunted him the rest of his life, her words, and continues to haunt him. So we have to remember that we are responsible for our youth, we're responsible for our children. And the earlier you look at a situation, the better you can resolve it. Now, I want to say one important qualification, then we move on to some other topics. Someone will say, well, I did everything I can, and my son or my daughter is not following the way I would have liked them to grow up. Let's assume you did do everything you can. My goal here is not to focus and say you didn't do everything you can. We never know what person's journey is about. You still have to embrace your child no matter what. I am suggesting, however, that the more vigilant we are and the less guilt-ridden that we bring into the picture, the better it is for the child. So you need to get good advice how to deal with a child that is strayed, so to speak, and is not the way you want them to be. You may need to get professional advice and not follow just your instincts, because your instincts may be either too critical or maybe too detached or too whatever it may be. But we all need to have the Shoftim v'Sheitim Titn L'cha B'chol Sharecha when it comes to these matters. Now, I don't know whether we can get rid of the stigma involved, but I do know this, that if we found this to be our problem, instead of your problem, that one's problem, it'll definitely go a long way. We have to be able to remember, and I was given a statistic here, over 26% in adults over 18 years old report having a mental illness or 1 in 5 adults. Now, the number may be higher, but I don't like to necessarily diagnose someone and say mental illness, but the problem, mental and emotional issues are quite common. Whether they're nature, nurture, combination of both is irrelevant to the topic right now. What's necessary to know is that if we see it as our joint issue, it'll be a lot easier to deal with. So should you have this issue, let me conclude with saying this for this episode. Go speak to someone discreetly that you can trust. Just get it off your chest. Get another opinion. And you'll be surprised that that begins to be somewhat of a relief instead of something that you're just allowed to carry inside of you. I see parents, I see adults who carry such a weight. Their whole lives get distorted. The guilts, the lies, the different distortions and convoluted states that they have to go through to deal with it, because they cannot deal with the situation, which does not help the person who is suffering in this particular fashion. More to speak about all of this, and I will speak more. I welcome your comments, your critique, anything you would like to say about this issue. But let me go on to the next topic. Since I already brought up the issue of can I be frum and homosexual, so let me read to you a letter that someone wrote to me. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I listen to your weekly broadcasts every week and I enjoy them. I'm writing regarding a sensitive issue. I'm a 23-year-old Lubavitcher male. Ever since I entered puberty, and maybe even before I knew, I was attracted to men and not to women. I was never abused and had a good childhood. I love my parents and my siblings. As all my friends date, I don't. I'm not sure what to tell my parents, family, and friends. Yet I would like to have a meaningful relationship in my life, a partner. I want that relationship to be fulfilling physically and emotionally. I know that I can't have that. What am I to do now? What is God's mission for me? Was I created to remain celibate? I know that I'm not interested in shock therapy or someone trying to convince me that I really am attracted to women. I'm not. One additional point, as I grow old, unanchored by a meaningful relationship in the Frum community and with no healthy outlet, I'm concerned that I will be drawn to other places and communities where I can find a partner and fulfillment. Your guidance will be very helpful. Almost a similar question was asked to the Rebbe about this, and there's a 3-page letter that the person writing to me, if you send me an email to simon@meaningfullife.com, I'll be happy to forward you the letter. Briefly, and I believe I read at least the content of it, the gist of it, of the letter, is that since God is the one that created us and knows best what is the way we should live our lives, including sexually, and the Torah tells us that certain things are acceptable, certain things are not, it means that there's no way that a person can live an unfulfilled, a meaningless or unmeaningful life due to the fact that they may have tendencies or they may have an inclination, as you describe here. Now, I understand you'll say you won't know better, you know who you are, and so on. But the fact of the matter, there are mysteries about every human being, and some of us are given challenges that others are not. The Rebbe speaks very strongly there about how a person can deal with every given challenge. So I would suggest that you speak to someone and see the alternatives. I know you're ruling out certain things, and I'm not suggesting shock therapy, I'm not suggesting other things. But this cuts to the heart of the essence of your challenge. Now, then the Rebbe concludes that letter, I should say, She says, and in response to the question you may have is, why are you given such a challenge, not someone else? The Rebbe says, because at times God wants to bring out a strength in you. There was no way that strength could have been expressed, could have been revealed, unless you had a challenge of this nature. I've never seen that before in a letter. That the Rebbe always brings that no one's asked to do something that they don't have the power to do. But to go further and say a particular challenge comes our way, it's the only challenge that could elicit a certain strength that you would never have been able to have unless this challenge. That's, I think, a one-time thing the Rebbe says. Now, what that is, what strength that is, the Rebbe doesn't say. Is it the strength? Some people suggest that it's the strength that maybe you have to sacrifice your sexuality to God. I find that to be a problem because sexuality is part of the human being. I'm saying something that I've heard from some people suggesting that some people have, that's just like Shmuel, if you want to say. Shmuel Hanovi, his life was given to God by his mother Chana because she had the blessing of a child. It's a certain sacrifice, like an Akedah, that maybe some people have to sacrifice their sexuality for God. But that would mean that they remain celibate and not have the mitzvah of prudavu and not have the other things that the Torah says is so much around family. That's why I find it hard to say that response. Even though, as I said, there are people that think that way. If you have any thoughts on this, please. I would have to say that at the end of the day, sexuality is a mysterious force, and whether it's heterosexual or homosexual, it could be unhealthy. I mean, homosexual is clearly forbidden, but I mean, say even my point is that even heterosexual relationships can also be unhealthy. It's a mysterious force, and for some people it becomes very obvious, that mystery, when they are faced with this challenge, where they have an attraction to the same gender and so on. So we have to say that it tells us, based on this letter, that there's a deeper understanding of sexuality that this can reveal. And if you really dug deep enough, you probably would find that answer. And in some way, ultimately be able to channel it into, yes, a woman. The fact that you say you're not attracted to women needs to be looked at. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but to just say it as a statement of fact, just because today it's become politically incorrect to say otherwise, I need to challenge that. So if I was to speak to you personally, I would say to you, let's look at that. Because at the end of the day, what is it that we're really attracted to in another human being? Is it the male and female element? What is really going on here? What is the meaning of sexuality? So my heart goes out to you, and my guidance to you is not a simple one. I would say that you need to find someone you can speak to. And if you feel that I'm a person you can speak to, I'm more than, I don't like to say the word happy about a topic like this. Let's talk about it. Because what is the alternative? You want to remain frum, you want to remain someone that is committed to God. This is a fundamental component. And I'm not talking about now the sin of it. Because some people could say, listen, I have other people do other things. Some people don't keep Shabbos, some people Lashon Hara, some people steal from others. In a chanami, you could be a frum Jew and have this challenge. And some people even succumb to it and say, listen, I'm religious in every other area. I'm not going to get into measuring which mitzvah makes somebody frum, not frum. I discussed that a few weeks ago as well. But the context of building a family, the way the Torah says to build a family, it's very difficult when a person gives in to this particular this particular taiva, whatever you want to call it. Because then it goes against so much of the fundamentals of the whole foundation of a binyan adayad, and a bayis nema b'Yisrael with family and children and so on and so forth. So you have to say that there must be a way that this sexuality can be channeled in a healthy approach. Again, the letter of the Rebbe is available for anyone who wants to contact us directly, simon@meaningfullife.com. Here's also an opportunity to pose your questions in general, confidentially, anonymously at our forum at meaningfullife.com/mylife. Okay. A follow-up, another question in this regard. Again, viewer discretion advised. My daughter was sexually abused and later abandoned by her father at age 7. She's now 22 and has sexual identity issues, which have taken her into a relationship with a woman that had a life situation similar to hers. I understand why her trust in men was shattered and love her for who she is, not for her behavior. Yet I don't endorse her choice as good. Torah is clear on this. There are now synagogues that condone gay marriages and encourage it. I don't want her to leave a community altogether and lose connection with Judaism. How should we approach holidays and Shabbos, especially high holidays? Do we come to her synagogue and respect her lifestyle with her partner, or must we divide the family? Oh, okay. Now that's a heavy question. And I don't have a quick answer for this, to be very honest. I think it's case by case. I think number one is, remember, a child always remains your child, no matter what happens. Whether you completely disagree with their choices, whether you completely, whether they do something that's completely unacceptable, whether it's even intermarriage, the child remains your child. So to suddenly cut off and say I have no connection to the child is definitely not an option, especially in our day and age. At the same time, how do you distinguish between the two? Yitamu chatoyim v'lo chaytim. How do you make it clear that you don't accept this lifestyle while accepting the child? It may come down to some heart-to-heart conversations that you never stop expressing the love that you have to the child, and at the same time explaining how tortured and torn you are. You know, I would not necessarily go into the area of influencing the child at this point. An adult child made choices. It could very well be it's coming completely because of the abuse. But you know, at the end of the day, that person has to come to take care of themselves. I think you have to maintain an open line of communication, share the love, but I do not think you have to participate in that person's lifestyle in every given way. Does that mean never to visit her in her place? I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say never, but it has to be clear that there's a distinction. I think it's very important to depersonalize it. It's not about winning a battle here. That I'm not going to come to this because I want to show you. No, it has to come from a loving place, and at the same time you have deep standards. Remember, at the end of the day, the reason we may be disturbed by this cannot be for personal reasons. It's because it is God that's involved here. That means it cannot come from your anger, or your frustration, or your disappointment, or your guilt, and so on. That's what's so difficult, because we bring ourselves into it. Now, can we become that godly where we only think about the inyan, about the subject itself? Maybe not. That's why I'm so adamant by saying, so then you have to stay away from being judgmental in that context. And that's the Aveda that we have. That's the work we have, is to not allow ourselves to get caught up in the shock, in the personal reaction, because that goes back to what I said earlier. Then it's you that's getting involved there. This is an opportunity. This is a challenge to become this most selfless type of person, parent you can become, because that's what it's going to require. It's going to require digging very deep to become as selfless as possible. I know it's easy to speak, and I can't put myself in your shoes because I don't know how I would react. But it's critical. It's critical for the welfare of the child that we become, in this context, as selfless as possible in the context of not allowing our feelings and our reactions to be a factor here. And someone will say, okay, why do you want me? Why are you disturbed that I have made this choice in my life? They call it a choice or whatever it is. Say, because the Torah says it's forbidden. They'll say, so you suddenly are the most committed person to the Torah. What about this area in your life, that area in your life? So it's very careful. We have to be very careful when we start becoming the representatives of the pristine, the perfect idea, the perfect standard, what God wants of us. And also, we all know that certain things we're homophobic about. We have far less problem if our child speaks Lashon Hara, or our child does something that's selfish or greedy, than something of this nature, because the whole behavior of anything homosexual is far more disturbing to many people. So is that the factor? That should be the decision maker? That's why it's critical that you have to dig deeper and say, this is a challenge God sent me, I don't know why, but I have to dig deeper in being a more loving, kinder, and more sensitive and selfless person in this journey. Because the more godly you become, the more of an example it will be for your child. Because I can guarantee you that no person does not respond to truth. If your child, no matter how old she is, no matter what she went through, and sees suddenly such a love coming from you, that you're ready to love her to that extent, as far as painful as it may be, that also has an impact. So it's a difficult thing to ask for, but you know, I don't see an alternative, especially coming from a Chassidic point of view, which is demands from us, l'shana teva midesa, l'shana midas ativim, that we have to overcome and even sometimes change and transform ourselves. And our children are the way we do it, because we love our children with such a level of love. Instead of imposing ourselves on them, they force us to go to a place to understand how to reach them even in these darker moments. And that's what the real challenge is on this issue. Okay. Let us go over straight into, there was one topic, criticizing others, I will deal with next week, but I'm going to deal with the Chassidus question of the week. What is the difference between Kabolas Ol, Iskafiya and Mesiras Nefesh? To read the question inside, let's see here. Thank you, Rabbi, for taking your time to answer this and all other questions. I don't fully see the difference between Kabolas Ol, Iskafiya and Mesiras Nefesh, Mesiras Haratzon. The difference that I see is Kabolas Ol, the beginning of Avodah, it seems to be more of a mindset. For example, a person with Kabolas Ol does mitzvahs even when he isn't in the mood. Iskafiya, also holding yourself back, but seems less of a mindset, more of a quick decision. Example, I should get up and go to daven, but I don't want to. So I have Iskafiya, and I go and win this time. Like it says in chapter 27, each and every push. And Mesiras Nefesh seems like a bit of both. Thank you for your help, for any help. So let me first translate the terms. In Chassidus you find Kabolas Ol, but it's really based on the Gemara and Mishnah and Brachas, Kabolas Ol Malchus Shamayim. It's Kabolas Ol mitzvahs. It means to accept the yoke of heaven. In the lingo or in our lexicon, it means Kabolas Ol means this Aved al pi seichel, which is what's rational, makes sense, and Kabolas Ol is accepting the authority, even if you don't understand Nasa v'nishma, accepting authority. That's Kabolas Ol. Iskafiya comes from the word; it's an Aramaic word, it means koife, to force yourself, to stop yourself, refrain yourself from doing something. It's often brought in the context of Iskafiya and Ishapche. Iskafiya means koife, to stop yourself, refrain. Ishapche means to transform. It comes from the word haficha. So Iskafiya, Ishapche, haficha. Not just to refrain, but to transform. And you'll find often in Chassidus, Iskafiya is the first step. You refrain. You want to eat something, don't indulge in it. You want to do this, don't indulge. Hold back. Then comes stage 2, where you don't just hold back, you use it to l'shem shamayim, for Kedusha, you transform it. And often it has to take those first 2 steps. Some things we have to have Iskafiya first. We can't always go from to Ishapche. And Mesiras Nefesh literally means to give your life, the giving of life. Chassidus explains, Nefesh comes from Rotzen. That the Rebbe brings an explanation on that. What does that mean? That means giving your entire desire, your complete self-sacrifice for Hashem, for God. Now the truth is, if you really want to break it down into more levels, there's also Mesiras Nefesh Shebeguf, there's Mesiras Nefesh Shebeneshama. Mesiras Nefesh Shebeguf are those that actually gave their physical lives, like Rabbi Akiva. That was the Mesiras Nefesh in a physical sense. And Mesiras Nefesh Beneshama is that they're in quality. It's as if they've given their entire lives, complete dedication. Now, in Samach Vav, in Ayin Beis, I should say, in the chapters, in the 60s, he talks about the effects of makifim on our lives. And there he goes through a whole bunch of different types of impact of the different types of makifim that they affect us. And he speaks about the effect of Kabolas Ol, where that comes from, because all these are makiv dika effects, because they're not primis dika transformation, they're more you're subjugating yourself to something higher than you are. And he speaks about the different types, Kabolas Ol, Mesiras Nefesh Beguf, Mesiras Nefesh of the Neshama, Amuna, faith, because you can throw faith into this as well. I have not seen Chassidus anywhere explain these 3, comparing these 3, but I think taking where you left off, I would say Kabolas Ol is usually used as the foundation, like in Perek Mem Aleph and Tanya, the foundation is Yiras Hashem. Kabolas Ol would equate with Yiras Hashem, which is the foundation that you know that there's a higher authority that's watching. And that itself, we know there's Yiras Tata, there's Yiras Ilah, and Tanya explains it all in those chapters. But let's suffice with that. The Yesod, Ikri Yesod Aveda, the foundation that you accept that there's a higher authority. Anechi Hashem Elokecha. So it's a state of mind, not just the beginning of Aveda, it's also a state of mind, as you put it. And it's how your whole attitude is that you are here to serve something greater than you are. Iskafiya is a particular type of Aveda. It's an attitude to something. Iskafiya can be an outgrowth of Kabolas Ol. If you have no Kabolas Ol, why would you have Iskafiya? But Iskafiya per se is not Kabolas Ol. Iskafiya is a way of approach to something. That Kabolas Ol would be like the foundation. Iskafiya is that when I approach something, I approach it either by avoiding it, refraining, or by transforming. So that's an approach. Mesiras Nefesh is also can be an outgrowth of Kabolas Ol, but Mesiras Nefesh is the ultimate sacrifice, where a person's entire life is dedicated. Kabolas Ol is more of a passive state that I accept as an authority, and when it comes up, I follow the higher authority. Mesiras Nefesh is an active state. It's an active state of complete dedication, sometimes to the point of giving your life, or complete dedication of giving away your ratzon, your desires, and you're dedicating your entire life to the Eibishter. So Kabolas Ol in that sense would be like a foundation of a building. Iskafiya is the way we move around the rooms and how we act and interact with the world around us. And Mesiras Nefesh is the ultimate total commitment. That means that your entire life, your entire desire is completely committed to something that's not yourself. So though they all have obviously a common denominator, and one is an outgrowth of the other, but they're very different. And if you look at Ayin Beis in the chapters I mentioned, the 70s, as I said, you'll see where he discusses it more in detail, and he actually breaks it down to, there's also the Aveda that affects Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and each one of them has a certain type of commitment to something greater than you are, which is the effect of a makif. Because makif affects us to go outside of ourselves. Then there's the Aveda Primis, which is the Aveda of Mechin and Midas, where you internalize and integrate the divine in your life, which is a different discussion. So this would all go into makifim, but different effects of makif in our lives. Let us conclude with MyLife Essays. Again, 3 essays, 2 in Hebrew, 1 in English. The first is about self-confidence, productive self-evaluation by Menachem Khalili, age 23, Shliach in Yeshiva Rechavot. He comes from Kiryat Malachi. So, this one is about, essentially begins by quoting Maslow, Abraham Maslow, who talks about the pyramid of human needs, with a critical need being one's own self value, how you value and you see your own contribution to the world. And he says that today, especially, this becomes even more under pressure because there's so much competition and it's so global. Everyone knows about everyone else's challenges and businesses, that it becomes more difficult. So he quotes 3 main sources to address this: the Rebbe Rashab, Mittler Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe goes into a discussion in Ayin Beis about the difference between Toyu and Tikkun, that there's 2 ways that a person can feel special. One is because of the things they've accomplished. One, from their accomplishments, from their personality, and so on. And one comes from the root of who you really are. The first one obviously is impacted by others, because if you accomplish something, you see someone else accomplish something, you may feel diminished. Whereas if it comes from the inner core, it doesn't have that same impact. Then he goes on to say the Mittler Rebbe has a similar thing, and the Mittler Rebbe talks about how we approach a mistake when a person falls, a setback, I should say. One is that we look at it as this specific thing was a setback, or it shakes your whole essence and reflects and diminishes you as a person, which of course can lead to melancholy and depression and so on. And then he says the approach to deal with this is the Moichin approach, that cognitive conditioning can have an impact on how a person should ultimately not allow themselves to be impacted by others, but let them access their inner self, their inner core self. Very interesting, and I believe a very well worth reading essay. I should mention that these essays, even though they were not the top 10, and definitely not the top ones that won the first top prizes, but they're all in the top 90 that were the semifinalists that went through that out of 530, got to the last stage of marking, and then from the 90 the judges chose 11, and which were the 11 finalists that we already read. So these are all high quality essays, and very little difference in scores, but it was sometimes just a few percentage points that caused us all to judge it in this way. I say us, I wasn't a personal judge as I mentioned, but the judges judged it, and obviously I'm part of the process of writing the guidelines and so on and so forth. So this is available by subscribing to our newsletter. You can get these weekly new essays that we post, as well as on meaningfullife.com/mylife/contest. Essay number 2, an English essay, is Controlling One's Feelings by Separating Them from the Facts by Esther Gur, age 58, secretary at Neve Daniel, Beitar Ilit in Israel. This is a pretty moving and touching essay, personal essay about how a mother went through the anguish of her son going off and away from Yiddishkeit, and how she dealt with it. And she basically says a sikha in Tchelik Yud, this famous sikha about the mirror image, the Baal Shem Tov's Torah, helped us distinguish between her feelings and the facts. That knowing that when you see something in another person, it means it's reflected of you. Then there's a separate thing is the facts of the situation that have nothing to do with your reaction to it. The difference between Chum and Shem and Yafas. Shem and Yafas, when they saw Noach in his stupor, in his state, they did what had to be done and they addressed it. But Chum, because he saw the nakedness, which means it was reflective of himself, his feelings got involved, then that meant it reflected within him. In other words, separating between what has to be done and how you react to it. So it's again a very interesting, very personal essay, quite moving, that addresses it that fashion. Okay. And finally, essay number 3, The Power of Persistent Positive Thought by Chana Kalachi, 27, works in the Diamond District and lives in Crown Heights. And she basically does a study of some of the greats in history, secular Beethoven, Einstein, Michael Jordan, Bill Gates, and Thomas Edison, and finds within them something that Chassidus teaches, which is a certain persistence, that no setback ever disturbs them. Tracht gut wird sein gut. And weaves it into a very fascinating essay of human motivation and how to achieve excellence. That most people are driven by fear, and fear of their own inability to succeed, fear of failure, and so on and so forth. Again, a very well-deserved essay. And with that, we conclude the 3 essays for this week. So, as we come to the conclusion of this episode, let me wish everyone a very freilich and chedesh. And a freilich and chedesh, the Rebbe once used freilich and chedesh El as well. But it's a chedesh harachamim, a month of compassion, a month of tshuva, a month of accountability. Chassidus explains that El is tshuva tata, Rosh Hashanah Kippur is tshuva ilah. The Rebbe explains it's all relative. Tshuva tata is like cleaning out your house in order to bring a new furniture. So first you got to get the dust out. You don't bring tshuva ilah is the Veda of Ruach Tashav Elokim Asher Nasana, just connecting to godliness, to a higher state. Not because you're cleaning something out, but you can't start connecting to something higher if your environment is not clean. So everyone should have a very Elul Dika Elul. We wish each other already as we enter this month, already starting from Tu B'Av. And it should be a very good Gebench to Yar Begashmis Beruchnis Hashana Teva Masuka. May we use these days well, showing love to each other, unconditional love, initiating when necessary between ourselves and family, between husbands and wives, between us and God. And we should be Zeich Anila Deidi to the ultimate consummation of the Nisuyin, which is Mashiach Tzidkenu, in this month of Elul. It was such a special month to the Rebbe, how he turned it into a whole movement of influencing anyone we can in the areas of the 5 Rosh Tevis and acronym, which is Teira, Avedig, Mil Chasadim, to increase in learning Teira, increase in davening, increase in Zdaka, of course, increase in Tshuva, and increase in talking and learning about the Geula, Limud in Yani Geula Mashiach. Everyone should have a very blessed week. Until next week, this has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 80. Next week, Sunday, as usual, 8 to 9 p.m. Thank you very much.